Welcome to the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, the space where research meets the real world. I'm Dionne Stevens, and today we're talking about Black girls' pubertal development experiences. Research has shown that Black girls tend to enter puberty earlier, which can lead to feelings of self-consciousness and pressure to conform to societal standards that often do not value their realities. Clearly, it's crucial that Black girls' support systems fully understand these social implications and have the knowledge needed to help them navigate this transition period. Recognizing this, we're talking with an expert on pubertal development in racial ethnic minority populations, Dr. Rona Carter, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Michigan. Dr. Carter's research is focused on studying the development of puberty in Black girls, specifically when it happens earlier or later than their same-sex age peers. Her research investigates the social and psychological impact of this timing by considering the complex interplay between off-time development and the socio-cultural context of Black girls. In her work, Dr. Carter examines race and gender-specific mechanisms, protective factors, and social influences to gain insights into the social and contextual factors that can be addressed to support the well-being of Black girls during puberty. Okay. So I am so thrilled and excited to be able to be speaking today with Dr. Rona Carter, who is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Michigan. And part of the reason I'm excited is not just about the work, but also I've been following her career for a long time. So I feel I'm in a lucky position to know you somewhat personally. So I will slip and be calling her Rona, but she is, of course, Dr. Carter at the University of Michigan. So thank you so much for agreeing to give us your time and sharing your expertise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here as well. And I'm excited to, talk about the work that I've been doing for quite some time and sort of the implications of those works for Black girls and Black women. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I want to jump right in because we're talking about puberty, which is, something that we talk about and we take for granted. And a lot of us just look at it as a biological phenomenon. Could you maybe start off by sort of situating the conversation by telling us what are we talking about in terms of your work when we're talking about puberty? And also what do we mean by pubertal timing? Just to situate everybody who's listening here.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about puberty, we are thinking about those biological and physiological changes, right? That make make us go from a child to an adolescent. And these changes include like secondary sex characteristics, like breast development in girls or facial hair in boys. And then we also know that there's these hormonal shifts that take place in terms of estrogen and testosterone that really play a role in these changes that we see during puberty. And then we also know that puberty is beyond just biology. And that's where my work focuses on thinking about the social and psychological implications of those experiences that girls have during puberty. So thinking beyond just biology. And I think what we found is that it doesn't really matter when you have these changes take place. It's about your perception of those changes and the perceptions others have of you when they see those changes. That's really what is more important when we look at all the different findings we find with puberty. The focus a lot is on timing, thinking about age at which an individual child begins and completes this process of puberty. They can begin it earlier than their same age cohort or their same sex peers. They might begin it later than that same sex peers or cohorts. And of course, we know that from a lot of the research that the timing of puberty has a lot of implications on their well-being, not just emotional, but also social and mental. And so a lot of the work focuses on thinking about timing. But we also sort of know that they, as I said before, there are these sort of perceptions of their timing that matter more. And it's so important for us. A lot of the work that I do is to try to disentangle where are their perceptions coming from? Like, who are they comparing themselves to when they think about the changes that they're experiencing? We know that there are sex and ethnic disparities of pubertal timing. Girls enter the transition a little bit earlier than boys. And then we also know that Black children, boys and girls, enter this puberty earlier than whites. with Latinas falling in between those two groups and Asians falling after those two groups. So we know that there's some ethnic disparities when we start to see changes in children who are going through this. And so that's part of what my work sort of looks at is what are the social and cultural implications of those changes given this ethnic disparity that we see in the timing of puberty. And so that's part of what I try to sort of understand in the work that we do. And these disparities could be contributed to, environmental factors or social factors. Everybody wants to know, why do we have these disparities? And it's so hard to kind of pinpoint the why. Like some researchers in California, some of my colleagues are looking at like endocrine disruptors, and how they are interacting with those estrogen and testosterone to initiate the process early, like, our hair products or our cleaning products, things like that could be disrupting the process. And so there are a lot of ways that they're trying to understand why we see these disparities, but we just know that it's happening. And it's actually happening earlier than in previous generations. And so kids are going through puberty earlier, around 9, sometimes or as early as 7, and they're staying in the pubertal transition longer than they've done in recent generations. And so it's so important for us to begin to think about the nuances of race and ethnicity and gender, social and culture, and how those things are impacting experiences that they have, given that they're starting so early, and they're staying in that process much longer than in previous generations.
I think that's really interesting, that generational piece in terms of it's happening earlier, but it's not just happening earlier, you're staying in the phase earlier. What is some of the things that make it unique for Black girls who are experiencing this earlier? Because I remember long ago it used to call precocious puberty. Is that we're still thinking about that way, or now has the research shifted?
And precocious is a little bit different. Precocious puberty is when you actually start really early. 5 or 6, there's some kind of indicator that you are changing. And so when you go through puberty at that age, we have these puberty blockers to kind of help you stop that. So you can start it around the age that we typically start puberty. So precocious is a little bit different than what we mean by early. What we mean by early is really comparing them to where they're at their age, and whether or not they are showing signs that could be earlier than other people that they see in that particular group of people. But yeah, precocious is much, much, much earlier. Yeah.
So for Black girls, what are you seeing that's occurring that's unique for Black girls, since they tend to be even among the earliest, even compared to other racial and ethnic groups?
Yeah, I think that the Black girls have a unique developmental task that they have to navigate because they have these intersecting identities, which match on to their structural experiences that they have in their environment. And so we know that they have to sort of navigate those changes in the context of the social groups that they belong to, whether it means their gender or their race or ethnicity. And then, of course, the systemic racism that's linked to those social groups, also impacting them, like racism or sexism or even homophobia. And so those experiences, because of that, they have different experiences than one might expect from other groups. And so right now it's important to sort of think about what are factors within being a Black girl, for example, being Black or being a girl or being a Black girl that is impacting the experiences that they're having. And some of the things that we're seeing is that some of the milestones of puberty are more salient for Black girls than they are, say, for other girls. And what I mean by that is breast development, for example, seems to be more important in terms of the outcomes that we see with girls as opposed to menarche, which is their first period. And we suspect it's because these are these outward pubertal changes that are taking place. And so other people are seeing this. And so they have to process how people are perceiving them, versus menarche is internal. So unless you tell someone, that you had your first cycle, you're not going to be like, so it becomes maybe not as a salient event. It's a memorable event, but it's not maybe as salient for some Black girls.
What are some behavioral concrete examples?
So we found that early development in Black girls, in terms of their breast development, is more strongly associated with delinquency than early menarche. And so those are some outcomes we're seeing. We're also seeing that, as I said before, like this perception of timing relative to their peers also seems to be impacting them more than, say, their actual timing, as I kind of indicated earlier. And so if they perceive themselves to be earlier or later than their peers, we're finding that it's linked to more internalizing problems like anxiety and depression. And then we also know that depending on what ethnic subgroup you belong to in terms of being the Black population is impacting the extent to which you might see some findings. So we find that, again, looking at relative pubertal timing, it has a stronger impact on externalizing behaviors in Caribbean Black girls relative to African American girls. And so that leads us to think about what is it about being a Caribbean Black girl that's different from being an African American girl. Again, going back to those ethnic and racial culture factors and looking at acculturation, looking at their family, looking to see how much that could be impacting the findings that we're seeing.
What was the most surprising finding about the within group that you had besides the one you just shared with us?
I mean, I think one of the most surprising ones was I did a study around relationships, sort of initiating romantic relationships and how that might be linked to depression and pubertal timing. And one of the things that we found was that for Caribbean Black girls, there was only a small group of girls who actually were in romantic relationships relative to the African American girls. So we weren't even able to sort of look across the different groups. And of course, that led us to think about, well, what are the factors that are impacting whether or not they start relationships? And how that's influencing the findings that we might see. So we ended up having to sort of take them out of the analysis but talk about why we took them out of it and thinking about next steps towards thinking about, establishing romantic relationships and how puberty sort of initiates that process. So typically, if you're an early developer, you're more likely to start engaging in romantic experiences. And then those experiences, depending what they are, could influence your mental health. So you might have more depression. That was the case for African American girls, but because we had such a small sample of Caribbean Black girls who were in relationships, we weren't able to look at that, but we were able to discuss it and think about what are the implications of that and where the future research needs to go.
So it's interesting because as you're saying this, you start off with one aspect of pubertal development, and now it goes into intimate relationships, and it shoots off to all these different questions and different areas for work just from this one question about pubertal development, which again, like you said, we think about it really as a biological framework. Mm-hmm. As a researcher, when you're thinking about this, what are sort of the short-term areas you're looking at?
Right now, some of the short-term areas I'm looking at is I'm thinking about how are they perceiving themselves as they're developing. And what I mean by that is based on the social groups that they belong to, what do they believe it means to be a girl? What does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be a Black girl? Trying to see if they can understand the difference between those three different social groups and whether they have different experiences linked to that. And then, of course, if those experiences are linked to their pubertal timing. And so part of it is doing a lot of qualitative work to really get at how girls are thinking about their social identities in the context of pubertal development. And then we also are thinking about short-term stuff in terms of like how are parents socializing girls as they're going through this process? When do they begin? We hypothesize that, we think that when girls start puberty early, that's sort of like a trigger for parents to be like, okay, maybe I need to have a conversation about X, and so we're wondering, does that mean they have a conversation about their race and ethnicity and what it means to be a part of that group? So are they doing any kind of ethnic or socialization practices to help prepare girls for the kind of experiences that they have? Are they thinking about, preparing them to experience any discrimination and how to cope with that? Are they talking about the different groups and thinking about ways to be proud of being Black and where the culture comes from and how that impacts their identity? Are they thinking about if they feel like it's better to sort of think more largely about different cultural groups and not specifically about your group? Like, it doesn't matter that you're Black, it matters that you're part of this larger group. So there are different ways in which they might engage in ethnic socialization. And so we're also thinking about ethnic socialization in parents and when are they starting to do that? And one of the things that we found in a recent study, we looked at parents of Black girls and parents of biracial Black white girls. And it was Black mothers of the Black girls, and it was white mothers of the biracial girls. And we just wanted to know, are they stressed about puberty coming up? What are some things that they're stressed about? And then does that stress lead them to have certain kind of socialization practices or initiate certain socialization practices? And we found that a lot of the Black mothers, if they are stressed about pubertal changes, they start to talk about their daughter. They start to prepare their daughter for potential biases and discrimination that they might experience. And only the Black mothers did that. The white mothers didn't do that. The white mothers focused more on strengthening their understanding of the group that they belong to. So really like this cultural socialization. What does it mean to be Black? Here's your history, things like that. They focused on more of those things. And a lot of reasons for that. It's hard to sort of like, talk about experiences of discrimination if you've never had it, right? So it makes sense that they're sort of taking this approach in a different way. But those are some of the differences that we found between Black mothers of Black girls and biracial girls. And so again, really thinking about those short-term implications of how are we socializing them? How are they thinking about their identities? And how can that inform us in the long-term outcomes that could be happening, short-term and long-term outcomes that could be happening? Maybe they're more protective factors that we haven't looked at because we're always looking at these risk factors. But I think that there are protective factors within race and ethnicity and gender that we haven't explored yet. And that's part of what I'm trying to do, to see, are there protective factors that we haven't explored that could help us understand why some Black girls might be having difficulties while others are not.
What would be your idea of an intervention to help Black girls transition through puberty more smoothly?
Mm-hmm. Some of the findings that I found that were particularly important were the findings around peers, because we found that if they have sort of same race peers, that seems to be a protective factor for them. Early developers tend to feel more connected to their school if they have more same race peers. And we also know that when girls compare their development to other girls, they're looking at peers within their racial and ethnic group and not peers outside of that. So there seems to be this important role of peers in some ways, I think. And so one of the things, I actually have an intervention, and one of the things that we do in this intervention is my community work. And so I've been doing this for 3 years in a school in Ipsy, a local school. And so one of the things that we do in the program is that we look at pubertal development. So we look at awareness, helping them, educate them around puberty. So talk about the different milestones of puberty. But this program is unique because it's a peer-based program. And so girls are selected, and then they identify their same-sex race peer, and they ask them to be a part of the program. And then they go through the program together. And so they're learning about the different milestones of puberty. And then they also are learning about gender exploration and racial and ethnic group exploration. They're also looking at coping skills. So how do you cope when you get yourself in a situation that you're not comfortable with? Puberty, identity, and coping are the key mechanisms in the intervention. So that's where I think we need to go. I think we need to have more tailored interventions for Black girls that can help them cope and adapt to any changes that they're going through and any experiences that they might have. Because of those changes, part of it is just helping them become more comfortable and aware of their body changing. And if they have a peer with them as they're going through it, because it's in the school, that person can be a support mechanism for them. And so that's where I think we should be heading, is thinking about what are those nuances within race and ethnicity and gender that could help us develop culturally sensitive programs or interventions that can better prepare Black girls for puberty, and also the experiences that they might have as a result of puberty because of the intersecting identities that they have and the systems of oppression that are attached to it.
I think what is so interesting to me about the work you're doing is that you're seeing it really holistically, and the ways that you're integrating identity and puberty and peers and school and family. And a lot of the work historically on Black girls and puberty focused on these biological markers of the timing. And often it came from a very deficit lens of looking at problematizing Black girls' puberty.
Exactly.
So I was wondering if you can say what brought you to do this I'm starting asking you a question I probably should have started at the beginning with, but what brought you to looking at the research in this really holistic, non-deficit positionality?
Mhm. I think because I saw such a huge gap, in the literature, because it was always about puberty effects and how they were negative. Again, coming from this deficit perspective, not really thinking about it from an intersectional perspective, not thinking about it from a strength-based perspective. And so I think I just saw the gaps, and I recognized that as a Black woman, there was something. I know that there is something about being Black that could also be protective. If you feel, if you have a strong racial and ethnic identity, if you have a strong gender identity, those could be things that could mitigate some of these effects that we're seeing. And so really trying to focus on the strengths within race and ethnicity that could help us. I think that's where I started. I just was like, wow, this is all interesting. I remember when I first did my first study, because a lot of times what people do when they do puberty research is that they collapse all the puberty indicators together. So they'll collapse height changes and breast development and menarche, and they put it all together and they call it puberty. And I said, well, what if there are differences by indicators? What if it matters more? And that's why I did that first study around the breast and menarche to see, are these indicators more salient to some girls relative to just collapsing it all together? Because if we're able to look at the different indicators, that might also move us towards thinking about potential mechanisms, specific mechanisms that might be linked to those indicators. But if you collapse them all together, that's a difficult thing to do because you don't know what is driving the effect that you see. And so I think that was part of me. I just looked at it. I was like, why are they collapsing all these things together? And that was literally my first study, was breaking those milestones apart to see if it mattered. And then also just thinking about, well, what about, racial identity and socialization, all these other factors that impact the experiences of Black girls. Why aren't we talking about that and the extent to which that could be impacting the stuff that we're seeing? And I think that that's just what just sort of drove me. I looked at those gaps and thought, let me see if I can fill some of these gaps in and see if it makes a difference. One of the things we did was, there's a question that we ask. Again, I talked about this, the relative pubertal timing. And we ask this question all the time, overall, do you think your development is any earlier or later than girls your age? And I looked at that question and I was like, well, we don't even know who they're comparing themselves to. Who are they comparing themselves to? Because if we can find out who they're comparing themselves to, that might, again, lead us to some specific mechanisms to help us understand why this particular question is impacting these outcomes that we see. And so that was one of the papers we did. We looked at, okay, we asked girls, like, who are you comparing yourself to? Are you comparing girls, in your group and other groups in terms of your race and ethnicity? Who are these girls? Are they girls in your school, girls in your neighborhood, girls in your house? Just trying to get a sense of more specificity so that we can begin to think about those specific mechanisms. So I think that's where it started, just looking at the gaps and trying to fill those gaps as much as I can.
Now you're an associate professor. You earned your PhD in applied developmental psychology. You're leading these researchers. You're training a next generation of scholars. As a Black woman researcher, what do you think are your next step goals around this research?
That's a really good question and something I've been thinking about. So I'm working on two projects. One is a conceptual paper to help puberty researchers sort of think about how we can use intersectionality to inform our work in our field. And so really trying to help researchers who study puberty to go beyond just their discipline, because there are all these other disciplines that use these really great theories that we're not as quite familiar with, but that could be really applicable to what we're trying to understand. And that's part of what that paper is about. Is like, here's intersectionality, here's how it could help us, here's ways you can get to start that process. And then I also am thinking about puberty as a social construction. So because there's so many culture and social implications around your changing body and social role expectations. And so there's another part of me thinking maybe we need to start thinking about this as a social construction and how that impacts the different things that we see in Black girls around body image, around their identity, around their experiences, things like that. So I think that for me is those sort of like putting out these ideals in the field in hopes that we generate more research that takes this intersectional lens to understanding our work, but also thinking about it as a social construction. So going beyond this biological event, really saying, this is a social construction, and that's what really is what I think is really impacting the different outcomes that we see, not the actual biological process, but the social process.
Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your
welcome.
research. And again, listeners can read more about your research and more about who you are on the blog page where we have all the information. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much again for inviting me. I was really excited about participating. So thanks again.
That was Dr. Rona Carter, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Michigan. To find out more about Dr. Carter, including accessing her articles, website, and social media handles, please go to this episode on our website's podcast page. Again, thanks for listening to this episode of the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. We have a lot of great guests coming up for the upcoming show, so be sure to check out our episode topics. You can do this by visiting our website at www.psychologyofblackwomanhood.com. And of course, one more thing before we go, please show us some love by leaving us a review on whatever platform you use to access this recording, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon. And also take time to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you haven't done so already.